Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com.
And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm blessed to work alongside both of my daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm. I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm really excited today for a number of reasons. Reason number one is I've upgraded my podcast equipment. I don't know if you can notice a difference in sound because I'm still trying to figure it out. But for the most part, with the exception of about 6 months, I've been using a USB mic for all of our recordings. And we've used the best USB mic in the market, but there's a higher caliber mic. It's a broadcast dynamic cardioid mic that runs through an audio interface. And it's really what you see in like higher level broadcast studios. And I've had the equipment actually for a while. You guys don't know this. Those who know me well know this. I'm like completely technologically incompetent. And I oftentimes get really intimidated by technology. So I've had this, $400 to $500 of equipment just sitting here. And I finally decided to, watch the YouTube videos and figure out what's going on. So hopefully you notice a difference in sound. Sound is also a big factor is the acoustics of the room. And mine, I think, are okay. Before I had a $600 sound system I created in the basement with was a makeshift system I created with all these soundproof blankets that I put around. Just made a booth. I watched a lot of videos on how to create your own booth, but we created a new office and the sound seems to be similar. So I've been recording in the office, but it doesn't have professional level sound acoustics in the room. But hopefully you guys notice a difference. It's something that's important to me, sound quality, and I'll continue to tweak it and figure it out and get it as good as I possibly can. But there's other reasons I'm excited, and one of them has to do with Dave mentioned it last week at the end, a shout out I wanted to be doing today for Wake Forest. Wake Forest is doing something that's very innovative, very creative, and it's something I'm really excited about, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about it today in this episode. I want to say a word about people that send articles into us. First of all, I can't thank you enough for sending articles in. I'm never disappointed anytime I ever get an article because one of three things happens when I get an article. One, it helps my own professional development if I haven't read the article. Secondly, if I have read the article, I kind of know what's resonating out there, and that keeps me in touch with the pulse of what people are reading, what's landing, and what's, sort of the topics du jour or what's, where the buzz is. And then the third thing is sometimes we get an article for our In the News. So keep sending articles our way. I greatly appreciate it. And even this topic I'm talking about today with you guys from Wake Forest, while this article wasn't sent in that I'm going to discuss, the idea was sent in from Ann Renee, one of our regular listeners from Illinois. And she sent it in, and that caused me to do a little bit more digging, and I found a really good conversation. So once again, keep sending articles our way. Another unique thing about this episode today is we're going to have 3 speak pipe, I'm going to say responses, questions/responses that you're going to hear. And I'm not going to answer any of the questions, none of them. So I know you're curious, like, what are you talking about? Tease, you got to stay around to hear it. But yeah, you'll hear 3 speak pipe responses, and none of them will get answered by me, but stay tuned and you'll see what I'm referring to. And then we'll have the final part of Lynda's outstanding interview with Ben Neely on the digital SAT. In my opinion, it's a must listen. I just think as a educated human, especially someone interested in college admissions, and if you're listening to this, you're interested in college admissions, you need to know what's going on with the new SAT. The paper and pencil version will be obsolete in a few months, and a lot of questions are going to come up. If you're a parent, there's going to be conversations in parent message boards. There's going to be conversations in PTA meetings. There's going to be conversations from friends, and you're going to be knowledgeable enough to help out those in your circle if you listen to all three parts of this interview. And so I think it's really important. And for many, many students, you're actually trying to make a decision. Am I going to be an SAT or an ACT person? And the information you learn here is going to be helpful for that. So we'll have the final part of that interview. And then I'm going to do something I haven't done before. I'm going to take a really long time. And I know that's scary when I say really long because I'm such a chatterbox. But I'm going to take a really long time compared to normal to do a really in-depth preview on what you're going to get on the next 2 Thursdays in the news section. We're doing something we've never done before. I'm super stoked about it, and I want to let you know what you can expect the next 2 Thursdays in the news section. So I'm going to go into a little depth about that. But before I go any further, I'm going to play the first speak pipe question right now, and this is from Jillian from Sydney. Take a listen, and I'll have a few comments.
Hi, Mark. It's Jillian from Sydney. Thanks for answering my question on international admissions. That was helpful. I, too, was born in Toronto. I came to Sydney on a gap year and discovered that you could do winter without snow. So I never went back to Toronto and been here a long time. You're right. Toronto has changed. I go back every couple of years to go see my dad. And I don't miss it. I like the multicultural part, but I do like the warm weather down here better. So the invitation's there. If you're ever down under, reach out and like to show you the college climate down here. Thanks very much.
So the reason I wanted to play that is I just wanted you to see how awesome of a community we have. There's a reason why we refer to our regular listeners who never miss an episode as our listening family. I mean, here's somebody all the way the other part of the country and is offering to show me around, but I know that Jillian would do the same thing if it was Lisa, if it was Lynda, if it was any of our co-hosts, Susan, Julia, Kevin, Vince, any of them. I know she'd be willing to do the same thing, and I just think that's really, really awesome. And it just speaks to the kind of special community that we have here that we've established. And it really means a lot to me when I see individuals doing anything they can to help each other. Remember, it is our mission to make college knowledge available to all. Oh, by the way, you can help us by blasting this podcast out in your social media circles. More and more and more listeners are saying they find us through particularly Facebook. Places like Paying for College 101, Grown and Flown, places like Reddit, College Confidential, certain moms groups. There's some in DC. There's ones all over. There's doctors groups. And a personal goal I have is to have us hit 50,000 downloads in a month. We've never done that. We were over 45,000 last month. And the only way that happens is by you spreading the word. So each one to reach one, each one to reach one, so we can help us fulfill our mission of making college knowledge available to all. All right, with any further ado, I do want to dive into the conversation of today, which I've teased out, and it's time to stop the tease. And so I believe in shouting out honor to whom honor is due and credit where credit is deserved. So I love creativity in admissions. And I also love when people are thinking of the least of these and they're thinking about access. And so Wake Forest has a new program, and I think it's super creative, and I really like it a lot. I want to talk to you guys about it. And so a lot about what I'm going to pull from today is going to come from an interview that Eric Hoover, lead writer for the Chronicle. If you're not a subscriber to the Chronicle, it's really worth the $9 for the digital version. Really is worth the $9 a month. They have fantastic content. And so Eric Hoover interviews another Eric McGuire, who's the VP of Enrollment at Wake Forest. And to be honest, somebody that I'd really like to have on the podcast. That literally, it just popped in my head now. I'm like, why do we not have Eric McGuire on the podcast? So we'll be reaching out to Eric McGuire, no doubt about it. And I might ask Lisa to do that, especially as a North Carolina resident. It might make sense for her to do that one. But so Eric Hoover interviews Eric McGuire to talk about this really new program. And he wrote an article, Eric Hoover did, and it's called A Better Front Door. Wake Forest U to offer early admission option for first-gen students. So what's going on here? Well, Wake Forest has had Early Decision 1 and Early Decision 2. We know those are binding programs. Early deadline, early notification date, have to commit, right? One is before November 1st, the other is in early January. And that's great. They continue to have them and no problem. But we know that first-gen families and under-resourced families, most of the time they really, really struggle with early decision. One of the hardest things I ever had to do when I first came to KIPP was convince them that early decision could be a really good thing. Literally, they had gone years and nobody applied early decision. Because the concept is super scary. Like, why would I commit not knowing how much I'm going to be asked to pay? And I get you can do a net price calculator, but one, they're not 100% accurate, and two, schools won't actually stand behind their net price calculator most of the time. They won't. It's more of an estimate. Furthermore, most under-resourced or first-gen families, they don't have everything completed by the timeline you need to have every single thing done in order to meet an early deadline. So for that reason, you really don't see many first-gen families applying early decision unless they're under the guidance of a very experienced sound counselor, or they're in a CBO, community-based organization, and they're getting that kind of guidance. That's really the only times you really see it. So what Wake Forest did was it said, you know what, we have a problem. We don't have very many first-gen students here. And Eric did something that was really creative. And he talks about it in his conversation with Eric Hoover. And he said he was talking to another member of the staff who just casually mentioned that there was a time when Wake Forest offered early action exclusively for North Carolina students. They had ED1, ED2 for everybody, but EA only for North Carolina students. And Eric McGuire was like, I've been here 4 years and I've never even heard of this. Are you serious? So the wheels started turning in his mind, and he's like, listen, we love North Carolina students, but a lot of them are comfortable applying ED. The population we really struggle to get into our applicant pool is first gen. Now, you've heard me say this before, and I can't say it enough. People in admissions look for people like themselves. That's one of my biggest takeaways in the decade of doing admissions. I mean, it was just so predictable. If we hired somebody that was really into the arts, they got really excited about artistic applicants. If we hired someone that was from a rural background, they got passionate about recruiting rural kids. If we hired someone that was really into athletics, they were looking for sports kids all the time. If we hired a high tester, someone who was a high tester themselves, they were pretty hard on people that weren't high testers. And it just goes on and on and on. If you go back and listen to my interview with Brandy Smith, one of the first interviews we ever had on the podcast, Brandy, a very experienced person in admission, having done admissions at 4 or 5 institutions. But she talks about when she got to Vanderbilt, and she had done so much student government in high school that she was trying to get every student government kid in the school. And finally, Doug, the VP, had to pull her aside and said, Brandy, we can't admit every single kid that did student government. So this is so true in admissions that you have to go through bias training. And any savvy director won't just rely on bias training. They will staff their weaknesses. So you'll sit around and you'll look and you'll say, who is in our applicant pool? Okay, how can we find somebody that comes from that background? So let's say you say, look, we're 15 to 20% international. Let's go find someone with an international background. They'll be sensitive to that. And you make sure you cover all of your key constituencies from your affluent suburban kid to your student of color to your first gen. That's how you build an admissions team. And want to know one of my pet peeves? A non-diverse admissions team, because they don't even get the ABCs of admission. One of the things that I used to so appreciate in working with Susan for the almost decade, 9 to 10 years we worked together at the Westtown School, and she oversaw the office director of college counseling. Sometimes her staff went from two, sometimes it was three with a part-time person in there. And you've heard several people that she's had in there on this podcast, including Shireen Herman Brown, Brendan Barnard, and many others as well. So, but she would always say to me, I could not conceive of having a 3-person admissions team and not having it be diverse. That's inconceivable to me. And she's referring to racially, gender, and many other things as well, just because she understands how important that is and how you need all voices at the table. And it's not about political correctness. You need the thinking. You need the thinking that comes from people with different backgrounds, because they'll think differently and they'll catch things and you'll miss out and you'll make bad decisions, really, because you'll have perspectives that aren't being represented. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on this too long, but so Eric McGuire's first gen. So he thought, hey, I'm sensitive to first gen. We don't have enough here at Wake Forest. In fact, some years we're single digit Pell kids. I understand that, first gen and Pell are not always the same thing. But last year, for example, first gen students were 11% of the incoming class at Wake. In some years, they're single digits. So he's like, that's not good enough. They could use a specialized program. So basically what Wake Forest is doing is they're setting up an early action, non-binding program exclusively for first gen. Now, there's different definitions of first gen out there. And so they're going with the most traditional definition of first gen, which is neither parent graduated from a 4-year college. Some schools, we've done podcasts in the past on what is first gen, and some people define it as 2-year college, and some people have exceptions if somebody's degree was international because they're still learning a lot about this country. And so they've gone with that traditional approach. And I know someone's thinking, well, what difference is it going to make having a special round of admissions for first gen students? Well, it's going to do several things. One, you're signaling to people that they're special. And a lot of times first gen students have imposter syndrome, or they're really wondering if this place is for them. They're intimidated by the wealth and the parking lot and the money and the sophistication of their families, and it just doesn't feel like it's for them. So you're sending a very powerful, welcoming message. And because it's early action, they can still compare financial aid offers and see where they get in other places, and they still have until May 1st to decide. They can see, they can visit, they can do more research, they can even apply to schools that aren't even on their radar yet. So that feels very, very good, taking the financial binding component off. And so, Wake Forest has had a couple of programs in the past. They've had a program called their Magnolia Scholars Program, which provides scholarship and need-based support. And it has several other programmatic opportunities involved. They have another program called First in the Forest. But the problem is those programs just have not been able to generate the applicant pool that Wake Forest needs if it's really going to be more socioeconomically diverse and not just be for middle and high income families. It's already a very expensive school. Sticker price can really intimidate people. Now, is this going to be a panacea? No, not at all. And one of the biggest problems to expanding your first gen numbers as well as your Pell numbers is you need a lot more money. And, Eric is I got to say, which Eric? I deal with two Erics here. Eric McGuire is very candid with Eric Hoover, in this conversation. Eric Hoover says, look, only 9% of students at Wake Forest had Pell Grants, according to federal data. And then McGuire says, I think about that every day. I think about it in terms of our access metrics. And for me, it's too low. And one I've got to continue to grow. And I do believe this first generation initiative will be able to help that. But I also recognize that in order to grow some resources on the back end in order to fulfill that purpose, In other words, we're going to need more money because it's going to require more financial aid. And so everything's going to have to happen. Eric McGuire goes on to say, I once worked at multiple institutions that have been 20% plus Pell. And I would love for us to aspire to something like that rather than 9 to 11. But it's a slow process and it's going to require us to rally our resources. So, yeah, it's not a panacea. You're going to have to increase your need-based financial aid, and that means the alumni. And this is what he said. My hope and expectation is that the Wake alumni will rally around this. In other words, some alumni with deep pockets will see value to this and will make contributions to make college more affordable, because you can have the program, but if you can't provide financial aid for kids to come in, then it'll fall flat. But I love programs like this because, and I'll quote Eric McGuire here, I hope we send a message to first generation students that they have a home here at Wake Forest and that we're interested in the insights that they bring to our campus. We want to highlight that with the exclusivity of this program. You know, a lot of times there's copycats in the world of admissions, like there are in most professions, and a lot of times it's actually a good thing. I think others are going to catch on and say, snap, why can't we do this? These are the kind of programs that are necessary, the kind of proactive. This is what we actually call affirmative actions. Affirmative actions, taking the initiative. Now, speaking of which, of course, that question comes up, you know, in Eric Hoover's conversation with Eric McGuire. He specifically asks them about, I'll read the question. To what extent did the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on race-conscious admissions influence your thinking about this initiative? Do you see this as a race-neutral way of enrolling more underrepresented students of all backgrounds? And then McGuire says, well, this conversation has started before the Supreme Court's decision. It's one that we were going to do regardless of that decision. He said the Supreme Court informed how we had to shape this. In other words, we could not offer this to underrepresented domestic students of color exclusively. But beyond that, this is independent from that decision. So that can be interpreted as we were going to do it anyway, but we are aware that this could also help with racial diversity as well as socioeconomic diversity. And we're doing it in a way that's in compliance with the Supreme Court so we don't get in trouble and it's ruled unconstitutional. That's smart. That's creative. These are the kind of things that I love it when I see schools do. McGuire goes on to say, and I'll read this. He says, we're at a point now where we're having this national dialogue about inequities in college admissions. He said, we recognize that some students are advantaged and some students are disadvantaged in that process. Students of means generally have some advantages over students from middle or lower incomes. And students who are from college-educated families have advantages relative to first-gen students. Recognizing this inequity, we're looking to put some policies in place that provide some counterbalance to that. And may your tribe increase. I think it's fantastic. And I wanted to shout out the initiatives that Wake Forest is doing here. Okay, friends, we're going to transition to Lynda's interview with Ben Neely. And I got so excited about this interview for so many reasons. One, the content I think is outstanding. And secondly, I'm trying to give more of our co-hosts broader roles within the podcast and not just have it always be Mark does the interviews, Mark and Lisa do the question from a listener. So you probably noticed more mixing it up. Lisa's been doing as many or more interviews than me. Lynda stepped up to the plate and done this interview. Julia's stepping up and been doing questions from a listener and been doing some co-interviews with me. And we welcome that. I just know that I only asked, Susan, Vince, and Julia if they would commit to one in the news a month. And so they're busy, and I want to be sensitive to how busy they are. But I'm just excited how everybody's been stepping it up. And I'll mention something Susan's doing later in a second when I talk about that extended discussion I'm going to have toward the end of the episode. But it just gets me excited when I see everybody stepping up to the plate, and we have so much talent on our team, and we're mixing it up and spreading it around. And so that's why we're not as cut and dry as we once were, where Lisa and Mark do the question, Mark does the interview, we rotate them, do in the news. No, you're going to get It's scrambled a bit, and I love it because we're introducing new voices, new talents. And not only that, people come with their own networks too. And so they can tap into their network and sometimes bring people to the podcast that are outside of my network. All right, friends, I said we're going to hear a couple SpeakPipe questions today before the interview. And the first one I want you to hear is from Maria, and she's lived overseas. And she has some really interesting things to say about the digital SAT because she comes from a background where her kids have already experienced it. And I thought it would make sense to play this, especially because this is our last segment, for now at least, on the digital SAT. So listen to words of wisdom from Maria.
Hi, just a comment. We moved back to the US after my husband's work assignment with a graduate from Singapore American School, class of 2021. My daughter was able to take the ACT online while there, and it was just a better test for her. And we just thought that that was global. And when my youngest, who's class of 2024, went to take the ACT, she was shocked to see that it's a paper format. So it's just so interesting to hear your episode on the SAT going digital, because I do think that those kids who live in countries who've had the digital option for these tests really have had an advantage. At least both of my students think that the digital option is an advantage because that is what they're most used to in their school environment. It slows, pen and paper slows them down. So unfortunately, it's not enough to convince my youngest to consider taking the SAT, but she agrees. It'd be great to go back to Singapore and take that digital ACT. I think she probably would be super happy with her score. She already has a strong score, but it would be that much stronger. So it's just really funny to come back to the US, we're Americans, and just find out that all these kids that live in countries where they're taking digital already, these tests digitally, have a pretty big advantage. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. And the next question that you're going to hear was also sent in from Carrie. And she has a question that I feel Ben answered. So we didn't have to answer it amongst one of our co-hosts. Ben answered it for us. Probably more last week than this week. I probably should have played it last week and teed it up, but partially last week, partially this week. Listen to Carrie's question that fortuitously Ben just answered for us.
Hi there, my name is Carrie and I'm calling from Westchester County, New York, just outside New York City. I have a rising senior and a rising junior. And my question has to do with the move to the digital SAT and how we might prepare our juniors this year for testing. One of the challenges I see is that the SAT is introducing this in March, which to me feels like the middle of the testing season. And now we have to think about, do we want our juniors to take the test in the written format or the digital format? Or perhaps are we going to have them do both, which might mean preparing for two different kinds of tests and two different techniques. So I'm struggling with the challenge of what might look like a good testing calendar for a junior, and a little bit frustrated with the College Board introducing this really big change in the middle of a season rather than at the end of the school year, so that it could start fresh with one particular class, and would love your perspective on both. Thank you, and thanks for always offering such a great podcast. I am a religious listener.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, it's time for the final part of Lynda's interview with Ben Neely from Revolution Prep, what you need to know about the new digital SAT. And in the final part, Ben talks about what happens if there's a power outage when a student is taking the new digital SAT. Ben talks about his biggest fear about what could be one problem with this new digital test. Ben talks about how the digital SAT is working now for international students. He answers the question, will the ACT be going to a similar computerized adaptive test? And are AP exams going to be computerized? Ben lets us know how soon a student will have to wait to find out about their test scores. He tells us how long the new test is. He gives his overall assessment on whether the decision to move to the digital SAT is a good decision or a bad decision. And Ben shares some words of wisdom that will help in approaching the new test. And Lynda closes by putting Ben on the hot seat. Listen and enjoy.
So let me ask you, because I know there were some difficulties during the online AP testing back in May. What happens? Because there will be something will happen either system wide or, there will be a thunderstorm and the power will go out or something kooky will happen.
Yep.
So what then?
A few thoughts on this. One, College Board has done, and I'm putting now my product development hat on as someone who used to oversee web applications or online applications. They've done a really good, thoughtful job of kind of worst case scenario planning for this. And I'll give you a couple examples. So the way it works with their application is students are being asked to install Blue Book and make sure they're authenticated with their official login before the test day. Inevitably, some of them won't until the morning of the test, and that's okay too. But they're really pushing schools and students and parents to take care of that the night before, 2 nights before. And when they do that, what actually happens is College Board is secretly, or if not secretly, behind the scenes, they are loading the students' complete test information onto their device in encrypted format. So Johnny, who's going to take the PSAT on a Wednesday morning, Tuesday night or Monday night, his entire PSAT, including all the possible adaptive forks in the road and all of that, is generated and loaded onto his computer. And what that means is there's quite a bit more resilience for the testing experience, even if there are interruptions. So let's say Johnny starts the test just fine at 9 a.m. and then at 9:45, Madison West High School has a massive internet outage and all of the internet goes out. That actually will not interrupt in any way Johnny's testing experience because his entire test is already on his computer. It has a timer. He'll be able to in fact, he wouldn't even know that the internet was out. He would just finish taking the test. However, within, I think it's 48 hours, he would need to reconnect to the internet so that his device can securely send his answer pattern to College Board. But that's one example of where they have built in some resilience. I would say the thing that is the biggest threat or risk to a successful and smooth test is going to be the student's laptop completely crashing or losing power. Now, complete crashes, knock on wood, I'm going to say this, and inevitably one of your listeners will have this happen, and I apologize, but there's no way to avoid it. But it is now, I think, really rare, especially with Chromebooks. I think that's been a really good step forward for low-cost devices that schools often issue to students. Pretty stable platform. They don't crash very often. If it crashes during the test and they're able to reboot and log in again, it freezes their time where they were when it crashed.
Okay.
So they won't lose any time. They'll be able to just pick back up where they were, even if it's 15 minutes later. That also extends to if their device completely bricks, as they say, and it just goes dead. If the school has any others lying around, then I think most schools are going to have something kicking around. They can boot that up, plug it in, log in, and resume their test on a different device as well. The guidance I would give to parents and students is make sure your device is charged and make sure you bring your charger and just plug the laptop in while you're testing. I know, again, from personal experience with my son's Chromebook that battery, I don't know how much charge it holds, but it's not a lot these days, maybe an hour. And the test, again, is 2.5 hours, give or take, once you include all of the proctoring instructions. But I would say, listen, will there be a student or a school that has a bad day? Yes. But based on what we heard from the international testing, so I didn't mention this earlier, but international administrations have already happened. In March and in June, they had full-blown real digital SAT administrations. And we did hear of a few little hangups, but it was very rare. And the vast majority of those students had a smooth experience and no issues. You are right that there were some challenges with AP, although my understanding is most of those were I don't want to say false alarms. There were real issues where the scores wouldn't submit right away, or the test wouldn't submit. But in the vast majority of cases, they were able to. I know there were a few folks that had to retest and make up, which is a huge bummer. But, and this is the sort of famous last word sentence, I expect it to go pretty smoothly with the digital SAT. If anything, digital PSAT, I could see some school campuses who maybe haven't sufficiently prepared or looped in the IT director at the school.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Inevitably there's going to be some issues. But I know the College Board has also planned for retakes, and they are trying to leave open ways to make sure that no student is overly impacted.
So I have two thoughts. Number one, plugging in your laptop and bringing your power cord, that's just good advice for all
Always,
of us. Um,
always.
always do that. And listening to how the test actually gets on the laptop, so it's not web based. To
Correct.
me, that sounds like a white hat computer virus kind of thing. I'm like that. Oh, so I've just been infected with the SAT.
With the Blue Book application. Yeah.
Yeah, that right, with the Blue Book application. Do you anticipate, given all of this, do you think that the rest of the AP classes will go online? And what about the ACT? Do you think they will eventually go online?
Yeah, so I'll start with ACT. So I actually was just in Nashville at ACT's annual Enrollment Management Summit, and I was able to sit in on a presentation from their head of product. And he assured the attendees that for the next 5 years, the ACT has no intention to move to a mandatory digital format. Now, ACT is going to begin offering to the general public a digital version of their tests. They're starting to pilot that in December of 2023, and then they anticipate by mid-year 24 or so, it should be widely available. However, that is not the same kind of digital shift that the SAT is making. So with ACT, they're not going adaptive. They're not building in any whiz-bang graphing calculators. It's effectively the exact same test as the paper ACT, just done in an online format where you can click the bubbles and some of the basic tools like underlining and striking through answer choices. So, and they've said they don't want to make that mandatory digital switch because they want to continue to offer students choice. Their line is some students may prefer digital, they may prefer taking it pencil and paper. We want to accommodate all of that for the foreseeable future. So for at least the next 5 years, ACT is saying we're not really making any changes other than starting to offer a digital proctoring of the exact same paper test effectively. So that's ACT's plan. On the AP side, I believe the number was 5 or 6 of the AP exams were offered in digital format. Again, my son took AP World History. He actually took it in paper format in a hilarious series of hijinks where he thought he had requested digital and then the night before found out it wasn't going to be digital. So that was great. But he encountered at least the digital phenomenon for AP this year. At College Board's conference, a number of educators there directly asked this question. Right now, for even those 5 or 6 digital APs, students still have the choice. Do I want to take it digital format or paper format? And the question was asked, are we going to move in a direction like the SAT and PSAT where it's digital mandatory? And the speaker for the College Board in this session, it was very telling how long he paused and the facial expression before he said, well, there's nothing on the horizon immediately that. So, what I took away from the body language and the subtext was that it is a reasonable guess that, yes, we are going to be headed towards a future where, unless it's a test like potentially AP Studio Art, or there could be some others that never lend themselves to
Sure.
digital format, but for the vast majority of APs, those are tests they could absolutely do in a digital format. And my expectation is that, yes, they are going to move to mandatory digital eventually. That might be a few more years. But if you think about all of the logistics and hassle from having to send physical boxes of paper all over the world and receive them, I just think I think that they're going to win over those schools that are concerned about it, and they're going to make that move in the not too distant future.
Speaking of that, how long does it take to get scores now? I mean, when they finish, does it flash up on the screen what your score is?
Not yet. It could. And again, I mentioned earlier that any listeners who might have taken the GRE or the GMAT will know that it really does for those tests. You take the GMAT, and when you're done, it says, "Hey, we've got a preliminary score. If you want to see it, click this button," or you
Oh,
can
they give you
cancel your score
warning.
without seeing it. Well, that's they give you. It's like it's like a game show where they're like, "Hey, if you want to see your score, click here," but that makes this score official. However, if you're worried that you didn't do well, you can bail, but if you bail, you will not know what your score was. It's actually kind of amazing. It's like a diabolical decision you have to make, but they will show you the score right then and there. For the digital SAT and PSAT, they are going to accelerate the time frame. So right now it's somewhere in a matter of weeks, 3 weeks or so, 16 to 25 days to get a score back, which is better than it was 20 years ago, I will say. For the digital test, it is currently, at least for the international students, it's been about 10 or 11 days to get that back. They anticipate, what I heard from Nicole Gibbs at College Board, is by March of 24, when they get to the US administration of the digital SAT, they're shooting for more like a week, 6 days, 7 days. So it'll certainly be faster than the current one. And she did say, over time, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to move that tighter and tighter. I think they want to just hedge their bets and have the ability to look at the data before finalizing. But I would not be shocked if by fall of 24 or early 25, it gets down to be 24 hours or 2 days, like really, really fast getting the score back, and maybe even instantaneously that students can get a preview of the score.
I guess that could be a good thing or a bad thing,
I was
depending
going to
on
say,
how
I
you do.
think
I don't know. Tears
never know.
right there in the testing room.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least I know, I'm thinking about my son with his AP exam, where he was able to take it and then be like, I don't want to think about that for 4 weeks. And he didn't have to think about it for 4 weeks. So.
There is that. That. So overall, all of these changes, how do you think they are impacting students? I mean, is this a good thing or a bad thing for our test takers?
I think it's a good thing. And I will note that I gave this caveat earlier that I have been critical of College Board in the past. I think some of their previous changes, call back to 2005 when they made the test 3 sections and they added the essay. Some of those changes were not good for students. They lengthened the testing experience. I don't think they really improved the ability of this test to give good information about college fit or readiness, but they did them anyway for whatever reason. This change, on the other hand, I think is pretty much across the board a good thing. There's going to be a small portion of students who, for their own reasons, are more comfortable with pencil and paper testing than they are computer testing. But I think that's going to be a really, really small portion. So I think for the vast majority of kids, this is just a good change. The test is shorter. It's on a computer. It uses a built-in graphing calculator that has, I think, a much better interface and tools than the physical TI and HP calculators do, and they get their scores back faster. So I think pretty much across the board, this is a win, and that's not always the case when there's a big change in the college admissions process, but this is one of these rare times where I think parents and students should be fist pumping, maybe not fist pumping, that might be a bit much, but they should at least be mildly pleased that something positive is changing.
Well, and you said it earlier. I mean, this generation, this is their native habitat, is online. So I think it's harder for maybe us Gen Xers to get our mind around than Gen Z.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. Any last words of wisdom for students or parents or counselors counseling students?
Yeah, I would say, kind of along the lines of my overall synopsis, I think I wouldn't be afraid of this change. I think let's try to find the right way to embrace it, because for whatever you think of College Board, and again, there are fair critiques of them in various angles that we didn't even bring up today, I think that this is, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, a student-centric and to some extent educator-centric change that's being made. And so I think that trying to find the right ways to support this, I will say I've talked to some test coordinators at schools who are very anxious about the PSAT this October, which I totally understand. But my sense is once we get through the adjustment period for everybody, for schools, for parents, for students, we will look back and say, wow, we used to bubble in our names in pencil and sit there for 4 hours, and this is a lot better. So I think that's my big overall takeaway. I would also say though, don't forget about the ACT as an option. I wouldn't bolt to the ACT just because it's not changing, but I think the right guidance for everybody involved is still to try both tests. Take a practice test of both, look at those scores, compare them on the concordance table, which lets you line them up, and then go from there. And I think that hasn't changed for sure.
Yeah, I think that is still very good advice. Well, I really appreciate the clarity you have brought to this because it's weighing on a lot of minds right now. But you're not going to get off this easily. We have a tradition here on the YCBK podcast of putting our interviewees on the hot seat. So
I'm
I have
ready.
some very important questions for you. You mentioned that you went to Berkeley, but you live in Southern California. So are you a NorCal guy or a SoCal guy, and why?
Oh, really good question. I still think of myself as a SoCal kid because I grew up in San Diego. But I will say it's interesting. For the vast majority of my life, I either lived in San Diego or the Bay Area, two places that both, I'll just say it, hate LA. They both think LA is terrible. And so if you would have told me at any point before I was 35 when I moved here that I would end up in LA, I would have said no way. But overall, I do think of myself more as a SoCal guy from my San Diego roots.
I won't hold it against you. I'm partial to the northern area, but okay. So when you go and you take that SAT and you come out with your 1600, which I'm sure you do,
Got
how
a
do you
couple of those.
celebrate? Is it ice cream? Is it pizza? Is it a nap?
I was just going to say nap. You actually nailed it. That is my wife thinks it's pretty hilarious that she'll, inevitably she would begrudgingly understand that I had to leave her with our kids while I go take the official SAT. And then I'd come home. She's like, great, now you can take the kids to the park. And I'm like, no, I need a nap. And then it is a really good chance to continue to build empathy for teenagers when you realize just how draining it is to everything about the experience. It just takes it out of you. So yeah, nap is the thing I look forward to most after an official SAT.
Well, I like those regardless of having to take tests. And I can assure you, I am not taking an SAT test.
We'll get you there someday, Lynda.
I don't think so. So when you are relaxing and you're flipping channels, and what movie comes up that you're always going to stop and watch?
Ooh, there's a few, but I would say, I've been traveling a lot for work this year to various conferences. And so you put on the hotel TV, and one that if it comes on, it doesn't matter whether it's the middle or the end or the start, the Shawshank Redemption. For whatever reason, if that movie is on, I'm watching the whole thing. There's just no way. I've probably seen the movie 50 times for that exact reason that I'm just flipping channels. I see a scene and I'm like, well, I'm watching the rest now.
It's funny because that's one of mine as well. And
Yep.
I watched it recently, like from beginning to end. I'm like, I haven't seen the beginning of this movie. And
Because usually you come in midstream. Yeah.
yeah, you just start in the middle and you're
Yep.
stuck. Yeah, it is a really good one. And then finally, even though you are living in paradise there in California, what's your bucket list vacation spot?
The place that I would love to visit that I have not been able to yet is, and I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to give two countries because there would kind of be a swing I would do, but it would be China and Japan. My wife is ethnically Chinese. She's seventh generation American, but so my kids are half Chinese, half, European, Caucasian, and would love to be able to take my wife and kids to China specifically. And then while we're there, I'm a huge fan of Japanese food and culture. So of course we'd stop off in Tokyo, but yeah, I would say China would be the bucket list vacation.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I'd like to get there too. All right. Well, Ben, thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I know our listeners will appreciate your insights. And just double checking the Revolution Prep blog, I'm guessing you keep up with all of the information on there.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just go to revolutionprep.com, there's a pretty clear link to all of our resources, information. There's even if you want to, with one click, you can jump right into a sample digital test interface that mirrors exactly what the Blue Book is like. So there's lots of things there, whether you're a parent or a student, that I think are really helpful. In the whole goal is to decrease anxiety, increase understanding and insight around this so that everybody can make their best choices.
Awesome. All right. Ben, thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Lynda. I appreciate it.
Okay, friends, I said I was going to have an extended segment at the end and about the next 2 Thursdays in the news and what you can expect to hear in that in the news session. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. Our regular listeners know we're very blessed to have a partnership with Colorado College where every 3 months we have one of their admission officers come on, and they're reading files, they're making decisions. All the things we talk about affect them on a daily basis. And while Susan is still reading, we do have that tremendous blessing on our staff. She's not in an office making the kinds of decisions that Colorado College admission officers are making. And so we've had Hillary on, Hillary Dickman, Karen Christoph, and we've also had Matt Bonser. Remember, Matt did a fantastic segment on demonstrated interest in predictive modeling a few months ago. So the person that we haven't had on is the VP of Enrollment, Mark Hatch. And Mark and Susan are both in their 5th decade doing college admissions. But guess what? Mark met Susan in the 80s when Susan recruited Mark to Bates. So Susan and Mark have a conversation over the next 2 episodes, and I moderate it. And they do something that I don't think you're going to hear anywhere else. And so I encourage you to share with your friends. What they do is they go decade by decade and talk about what was going on in the world of admissions. They start with the 80s, they go to the 90s. In fact, you'll hear the 80s and 90s on Thursday's episode. And then the following Thursday, you'll hear 2000 to 2010, 2010 to 2020, and then the current decade. And some of you are more familiar with the current decade because it's only up 2023. But they'll cover literally 5 decades, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010, 2010 to 20, and 20 up. And most of that time, Mark was in senior level positions in admission offices, although he also has had the counseling experience as well. And most of that time, Susan was directing a college counseling office. And so you're kind of getting the secondary school perspective and the college perspective. And I tell you what, it could have literally gone on all day. I would have loved it. I could have just sat and listened, chimed in occasionally when I had an insight, but just listen to the two of them talk and discuss how admissions has changed, what was going on in the 80s, what was going on in the 90s, what changes occurred around the turn of the century. It was too much for us to run it all in one episode. I just felt like we wouldn't be doing justice to it. I would have had to edit too much out because we're not doing 3-hour episodes. So I'm running it over 2 weeks. The conversation is about an hour and 20 minutes. And so we'll split it up into 2. But I think you're really, really going to like it. And Mark's in our rotation. So once a year, we'll have him back along with Karen once a year, Hillary once a year, and Matt once a year. And just want to thank the folks at Colorado College for just giving their time up because it's a busy, busy time for them, and to take this time to serve and help and invest in you. I'm for one, I'm most grateful. So you do not want to miss Thursday's episode this week or next week. All right, what's going on? What else is going on Thursday? Lisa's back. I know Julia's been doing several questions for me, but Lisa still does questions as well. And Lisa and I answer a question from Maya. Maya's in Southern California, and she has Black students, and they're concerned about diversity. How do they find a school that's diverse, but not just in number, that's also safe? How can you tell if a school is safe and it's a healthy environment for a Black student to attend? And so we answer that question on Thursday's episode. And then we also continue
in part 2 of 4 of Julia and I talking with Lee Coffin, the VP of Enrollment at Dartmouth College. And, like I said, I've gone back and forth between calling this tough questions about admissions to miscellaneous topics about admissions, but we bounce around and cover some of the most important topics in college admissions and get another person in their 5th decade in this process and get his insights. And that'll be part 2 of 4. And then for a college spotlight, Kevin Newton is back. Yes, Kevin Newton is back, and he's not actually doing a deep dive on a college, but he's talking about a very unique opportunity that the UCAS system has in Europe for waitlist students that a lot of people don't know. And so we wanted to inform us of a very unique opportunity that a lot of his students are taking advantage of, and that'll be a 2-parter. So we hope you'll join in on Thursday for what I think would be a really, really exciting episode. Friends, I want to close out with a quote that I heard this week for the first time. Now, I'll tell you something. I use Alexa all the time, and it's a problem because I have a client named Alexa. So every time I'm I'm having a meeting with her, that the crazy thing starts going off on me, and I have to call her Lexi or something to get around that. But I'm one of these people that uses Alexa a lot as my alarm clock. It does a lot of things for me. And all of a sudden, one day, my Alexa just started going crazy, and it started waking me up. And when it would wake me up with a quote. And to be honest, I found this somewhat perturbing and aggravating. One time I even tried to get it to stop giving me these quotes. But then I started to hear a couple good ones that I actually liked. And so this one that came in this week, I don't even really know who the author was. It's just some famous person. But I really liked it, and this is what it said. The difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no most of the time. And I was like, wow, that's deep. So some of you may know this, some of you may not know this, but I was in theological seminary in Dallas, Texas in the late 80s and the 90s. And I remember one of the speakers that came to our spiritual life conference, and some of you may be familiar, his name's Charles Stanley. He's actually a TV pastor, and he's got a big church in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember Charles Stanley came, and he was our key speaker, and then he did a conference for us he stayed for 4 days and just had questions and answers with us. And something he said has always stuck with me. And he said, you're going to have to learn to say no to some good opportunities, to some great opportunities. And that quote reminded me of that because, you have everything coming at you to derail you and keep you from what you're trying to accomplish. And part of being successful is having the discipline to block out things that are nice but not necessary, things that are good but they won't allow you to accomplish your goal. So that quote about the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people learn to say no most of the time. It really resonated with me, and I hope that you as a parent or a student, hope that you'll find some way to apply it to your life as well. See you on Thursday, friends.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.